Grab your beverages and turn up your interweb. Solving the world's problems 12 ounces at a time. It's Dudes and Beer. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to episode 308 of the Dudes and Beer podcast. I am Chris Jordan, your host, coming to you live once again from Austin, Texas. Man, I cannot wait for this episode tonight. I've been so excited. I want to thank LITM Media, as always. They are always out there doing great stuff on our behalf, hooking us up with amazing guests like Kris Newby, the author of Bitten, The Secret History of Lyme Disease and Biological Weapons. I heard about this work when it came out. I have, of course, heard about the dark, crazy history of Lyme disease and its actual origins, things like that for a long time. We will, of course, be having some documents from Kris added to the Knowledge Vault, which, of course, is available, folks, right there on your new Dudes and Beer app. If you're an Android user, don't worry, Orchard dwellers. No revolting, okay? No taking to social media platforms, planning things. We have the source code. It's coming to you soon. We got to find somebody to turn it into an app. But right now, you can hop over to dudesandbeer.com/app. There's a groovy little picture. Even if you go to dudesandbeer.com in the right-hand corner widget, there's a little thing that says download the app. Click the picture. It gives you a thing that says download. You download it. When you click the download file, it says install. If you already have it installed, then we send you a push notification like we did today about the episode with Kris, and say, hey, go update the app. Follow the same process, and it'll ask you if you still want to install. Super easy. We have the live chat there with questions. We have, hey, look at that. The episode is playing live right now. All kinds of great stuff there. There's even a tip calculator for when you are out and about right now and whenever the world comes back to a full state of normalcy. So you can make sure and get your 20% properly to everybody and even split it. It's great. This last weekend was Super Bowl Sunday. We had a great pre-record that went amazing. There was an interesting show, though, that I think was kind of a sideshow to the Super Bowl. There's always a flyover, right? There's always like Blue Angels, Thunderbirds, or a missing man formation in honor of vets that have served and are no longer with us. But the flyover this Super Bowl was super, super interesting. Let's go ahead and take a look at that on screen here. There it is, coming to us from Fox 13 out there, and absolutely wild. One of the things that you got to notice that I love, there it is in its glory, paused. Once again, typically missing man, something like that, maybe even a couple new fighter aircraft. What they actively flew overhead was the entire U.S. nuclear arsenal with wings. That is a B-2B flying, or a B-2 flying fortress, a B-1B bomber, and the B-2 stealth bomber. Every plane with wings that carries nuclear bombs. So yeah, really interesting message being sent there. If you just kind of examine it, it could be the message a good friend of mine said the other day whenever I showed it to him, and he was like, whoa, I didn't even think about that. But think about this message: despite who's president, despite any kerfuffle in the country, we got that, and we are still united enough to use it if they have to. That is probably the message being sent. Especially with everything going on right now across the globe, everything lighting off over in the Far East. Absolutely amazing. So let's get into, real quick, while we are right there, let's get into our news of the week. Welcome back to the news of the week, folks. It's been a little while since we've been doing it, but news of the week is where we actively go through some of the stuff on the Dudes and Beer Face group wall that we post. Of course, I post articles there all the time, and other members post articles there all the time, but it is absolutely awesome to see the conversation that goes on amongst our group now, the articles that get posted amongst our group. It really is a self-sustaining community of people trying to have an open conversation. So some of the interesting things that have popped up there over the last week have been, where'd it go? My group just disappeared. How about that? Let's see. Whoop. Hold on. Sorry, folks. Live things, you know. What are you going to do about it? Yeah, so there we go. There comes the group. There it is. All right. So there, of course, is our episode for tonight. But some of the things were like, of course, the Senate votes to impeach Trump and that the trial is constitutional. U.S. goes a year without a combat death in Afghanistan for the first time in 2 decades. Let your brain gnaw on that one. There, of course, is the interesting case of Tessica Brown, the nice woman who I guess thought that she could use Gorilla Glue on her head. So, yeah, there's an interesting ordeal going on with that. MGM Resorts, great one for our friends Mike Turber and Ram Dennison to cover from over there at 5x5 News. MGM Resorts stopping people filming violence instead of actively stopping the violence. And there's a video there of a security guy like coming up and asking this dude to stop filming. Like, not stopping the fight in progress. Just, hey, stop putting that up on social media and showing that fights go on at these casinos. Stop that now. There was, of course, a tiger loose in southwest San Antonio the other day. More impeachment news there. And one of the sad ones was, of course, multiple people wounded during a shooting attack at a Minnesota clinic. So, once again, tons of news there. Stop on by facebook.com/groups. Look for Dudes and Beer. We are always there providing great conversation for you guys, great conversation starters. Stop on by, join. Our guest tonight, once again, is Kris Newby, the author of Bitten, The Secret History of Lyme Disease and Biological Weapons. We will be getting into that more than juicy topic right after this commercial break from our sponsor, Podcast Cadet. Have you considered starting a podcast? Looking for a way to make your business a voice of authority in an industry? Then Podcast Cadet is the solution for you. Whether starting a podcast for yourself, your brand, business, school, church, or just plain fun, Podcast Cadet is here to help you navigate the waters of the podcast industry. Specializing in one-on-one consultation and training with industry professionals in fields ranging from podcast technology and editing to distribution, monetization, and even social media strategies. Podcast Cadet tailors their services to the specific needs of you and your podcast. Do you already have a podcast and trying to find ways to engage and grow your audience? Sign up for your Podcast Cadet audit today and let us help you explore new and exciting ways to leverage your content and elevate your podcast brand to whole new levels. From consultational workshops to affordable podcast production and maintenance packages, Podcast Cadet is your one-stop shop for everything podcast related on the internet. Visit podcastcadet.com today to sign up for your consultation or training and use code DUDES20 to save 20% off your entire purchase. That website again is podcastcadet.com. Our guest this evening is Kris Newby. Disclaimer, by the way, folks. There could be some trigger warnings this evening. Number one.
Come on.
Yeah. We're going to be getting into some hard topics. We're going to be getting into your federal government. We're going to be getting into biological weapons. We're going to be getting into the hot button topic of the weaponization of disease and the fact that there have been numerous government programs, even though we say we don't do it here, that's true. We don't. We outsourced it all to China a few years ago. So you're right. We don't do it here, but we definitely still do it. So let's welcome to the show right now, Kris Newby. How are you doing today?
Very well, Chris. Thank you so much for having me on to talk about weaponized insects.
I have been excited about this since Michelle contacted me by mistake, mind you, which is what was hilarious because as she's prone to do, she'll have a barrage of guests that she's sending out to folks, things like that, beginning of a month and everything. You were in one of the guest lists, and I was like, yes. And then she was like, "Oh, wait. Hold on. That wasn't for. That was supposed to be for somebody else." I was like, "But Lyme disease, biological weapons, that is all totally what we are all about talking about. Like, please bring her to my show." So yeah, I am so entirely jazzed to have you on tonight. There are so many ways in which this applies to our modern society. There are so many ways in which this issue reaches into our modern world. So let's start, as we are prone to do, folks, before we really crack the nut of this situation. Let's start with a little bit about you, Kris. How you came into this course of research to begin with. What it is really that you did for a living. I think that is so entirely important so frequently because so many times these stories come from people that, were already deep into research, that kind of thing. So let's go ahead and start off with who you are, what brought you into researching this topic.
Well, I live in the heart of Silicon Valley with my husband. He's a Silicon Valley engineer, and for over a decade I was a science and tech writer here. And the last thing in the world I ever thought I would be is like a tick and Lyme disease expert. But here
Right.
I am. In 2002, my husband and we have two middle school boys. We went on a vacation right off Massachusetts. And we had a fantastic vacation, and we came home, and a week later, my husband and I got really sick. I mean, sicker than we'd ever been before. Mega flu symptoms, COVID-like flu symptoms. And so after a couple days, we went to the doctor, and we're healthy people, so we don't have a relationship with the doctor. And they say, "Oh, it's just a virus. Go home. Come back if you're worse." And so that sort of started a year of hell where we had an undiagnosed disease for a year. And I'm an engineer by training, very methodical and good record keeper, and like very logical. So every doctor we went to that year, I said, "Hey, I think we might have Lyme disease," because we were in Massachusetts. That was the number 2 spot for Lyme that year. "Will you test us for Lyme?" Everyone's Lyme disease. Everyone said, "No. That's a rare disease. It would be like winning the lottery if you and your husband got it." So, fast forward a year. 6 months into it, we were still just deathly sick. It was like we had flu symptoms, chronic fatigue, Alzheimer's, arthritis, multiple sclerosis, and irritable bowel syndrome. Multiple of those symptoms every day. And after 6 months, we thought we were dying. We went through a year, 10 doctors, and $60,000 before we were diagnosed. And finally, at the doctor's last resort, it's one of those big academic medical centers, they tested us for everything. And for the first time, they tested us for Lyme disease, and I tested positive for it twice. And,
wow.
I was just ecstatic because we thought we were dying. We didn't know what we had. I could no longer...
I mean, you're in a rough place in life when you were ecstatic that you tested positive for Lyme disease, like you said, going a year with symptoms like this.
Yeah. My husband was faking it. He would, he was at Silicon Graphics then. He's famous for designing the TiVo remote. He's an engineer.
Oh, wow.
And product designer. And he's the reason everyone can pause television shows and have a family dinner. So thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
But But anyways, he would go into work because I couldn't work anymore. We needed health insurance because we had this crazy undiagnosed disease. At the time, we both secretly thought, oh my gosh, are we going to leave our kids for orphans? Because if we didn't have our 2 Silicon Valley jobs, we were a month away from having to sell our house because we needed cash flow. And, we have kids coming up to college. It was a very, very dark time. So finally, I test positive for Lyme disease. I'm crying all the way home, and because he says, hey, that test is bad, and so you don't have Lyme. We gave you that test, but we don't believe it. And so then I go home and I research on the CDC website, and I say, hey, wait a minute. It's a 2-step process. If I test positive for this first disease, they need to test it for the second. And I called them back up, and they go, oh, I guess we forgot that. And so then I tested again, it was positive, and they called me into the office and said, they basically fired us as patients. They said, we don't have the tools to treat you for that disease here. And this was the infectious disease department.
Wow.
At a large university. So I was crushed. Long story short, we found a Lyme specialist through Lyme disease support groups online, and they connected us with a really good doctor, and we were on our way. I mean, it took us, I would say 6 months to a year to be fairly functional. It took us 5 plus years to feel like 100% normal. It was a long haul. A lot of it was we didn't just have Lyme disease. We had a secondary parasite, is the babesiosis, which is like a red blood cell disease like malaria. And they take different sets of drugs. And it's a little bit like whack-a-mole when you get multiple tick diseases. You treat one and the other one flares. It's more of an art than a science right now, treating it.
Yeah, and well, because like you're saying, the source of Lyme disease is ticks, the bite of a tick, and typically, just like any mosquito-borne illness, any parasite-borne illness, really, you're bound to have anything from any disease from either the parents or even the host that the parent fed on, and of course anything that they've fed on since. So yeah, it's a long list and litany of things, especially once you're talking about a compromised immune system from something like Lyme disease to begin with. Things that you would typically be able to fight off, you wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, and it's a really big problem and growing. So a couple of weeks ago, the CDC published some new case numbers for Lyme disease, and they upped their estimate by quite a bit, and they said it's like 476,000 cases a year now. That's like about 1,300, an average of 1,300 new cases a year. It's been reported in all 50 states. That's where you live, not necessarily where you contracted. And, there's no end in sight. It keeps growing, and we still don't have a reliable test in the beginning. Just like that doctor said, it's not reliable. You have to take it multiple times. And, so it got me thinking, like, how come this disease is so incredibly screwed up? So I started researching, and I said, well, what we need is a documentary. So I teamed up with a really talented documentary maker in Marin County, and Andy Wilson, and we launched on a 5-year project to do a dramatic documentary on Lyme disease. And 5 years later, it was a semifinalist in the Oscars, Under Our Skin. And that was really a stake in the ground that helped a lot of people understand really why the disease is so controversial and political, and what patients need to do to get treated.
Well, and let's start getting into that. Now that we know a little bit of the backstory, the back history, how you came to be involved with this horrible disease and illness. Like I said in our pre-show, I myself have connection with Lyme disease. I don't have Lyme disease. I am not a sufferer. But my ex in Maine, her mother was. And that was one of the first times that I really started deep diving and finding out information about some of the biological programs that were going on. Things like Plum Island Research Center, the cases of Lyme disease whenever it first started coming out in New York, Pennsylvania, things like that. So let's really start backtracking now and start from the beginning of Lyme disease.
Well, I have to say, when we were doing the documentary, one of the last interviews we did was the discoverer of Lyme disease.
Oh, wow.
And his name was Willy Burgdorfer. He was the guy who discovered the causative bacterium, Borrelia burgdorferi. It was named after him. And he went public with that in 1982. And the NIH and public health said, yay, he's a hero, we've solved the Lyme disease problem. And so the public story is, oh, you can treat Lyme disease with 2 to 4 to 6 weeks of doxycycline and it's cured. And if you're still sick, well, you're just a hypochondriac, or you're just suffering from the aches and pains of daily living, or you have some sort of autoimmune thing. So, that was the story. And when we did the documentary, there were some rumors of maybe Lyme disease was escaped from Plum Island. That was a bioweapons lab for killing animals during the Cold War. And so when we sat in on that interview with Willy Burgdorfer, we were setting up lights and camera, and about 45 minutes into it, we got a knock on the door from someone at the Biolevel 4 lab where Willy used to work. He was retired then, and he says, I need to sit in on this interview. So he was basically saying, I need to be the minder of this interview. And the director said, no way. So that set up this real tension that there were stuff that Willy couldn't say. And sure enough, when we turned the cameras off, Willy said, I didn't tell you everything, with sort of a sly grin. And so, but we had to get the film out. We did that. I was done with that. And then we didn't go down the bioweapons alley because we knew we could never get that funded for the film because it was an indie film. So I walked away from it, and then it's like something happened. Well, 2 things happened, and I couldn't walk away from the Lyme disease problem, which is and was far from being solved. I was at a family birthday party, a large family birthday party. They had birthdays one day a year for the whole family, and there were 2 people who weren't in the family, and one of them was sort of like a grizzly guy. He looked like he was ex-military, and he was at the kitchen table slamming down drinks. And so I said, "Oh, what do you do?" And he goes, "Well, I was with the company, the black ops of the CIA." And so he spent the evening telling me these stories. Oh. And after his Apocalypse Now series of stories in Vietnam, he pauses and he goes, "Well, the weirdest thing I ever did was I dropped weaponized ticks on Cuban sugar workers in 1962. and my jaw just dropped. He had no idea that I'd just been researching Lyme disease for 5 years, and it was just unbelievable. But I would say that was the beginning of the book, Bitten, that I wrote, and I didn't know it would be a book then, but I kept on bringing him more drinks and going into the bathroom taking notes about all these crazy details about his Cold War escapades with ticks, and later on I would use those notes in the book. So that was the first thing, and I shoved that aside. I got a job as a science writer at Stanford in the med school, which is fabulous because I learned a lot about science and biomedical things. And then I get a call from a documentary person who also interviewed Willy, and he was screaming, and he was driving away from where Willy worked in Montana at 80 miles an hour saying, "Willy just said that he thinks the outbreak in Lyme, Connecticut, it's sort of in the lake they noticed it in the 70s, was due to bioweapons work he had done earlier in his career." So that was when I knew, well, this is a big story because this is a huge secret. First of all, that Willy Burgdorfer worked for 2 decades in the biological weapons program. He later told me he tried to turn fleas, ticks, and mosquitoes into weapons. He was sort of the bug guy on that team. And then that he believes that the outbreak of crazy tick-borne diseases, there were 3 of them in the late 60s, of a scary thing in the 70s into the 80s. He says that that was due to some accident gone wrong in the biological weapons program. He didn't do many details, so that was enough to start a 5-year research project that ultimately ended up as my book Bitten, that sort of explains this crazy Swiss-German scientist who came over in '50. He got sucked up into the insect-borne weapons program, such a secret program, more secret than as secret as the Manhattan Project for nuclear development. And then I just went into how he got sucked into the project. The U.S. experiments got darker and more dangerous with open-air experiments and not much oversight. And then Willy, at the end of his life, he got Lyme disease, and he started having empathy for the patients and eventually talked to, a couple journalists, me and a couple others, and let the information trickle out. Are you there?
Oh, sorry about that. That is often the case with these scientists that have worked in these fields, that have done this kind of stuff, that of course they spent years and years doing it for the right reasons at the time, but realized that things went far off the rails somewhere. And typically have their, be it a deathbed confession, or even as you were saying, whenever the documentary was being filmed, that the handler showed up and was, hey, we gotta make sure that nothing that he says is beyond any non-disclosures that he had.
Yeah, because they all took a secrecy oath.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
As I've interviewed people who were there, the witnesses, a lot of them take their secrets to the grave.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of work to get some of the information out, and then I went to many archives to try and get the old paper records. It was like putting together a 100,000 piece puzzle, I would say.
Wow. And the documentation that you have come across, that you have on your website, krisnewby.com/documents, is where you can find these folks. I have them all up. We will, of course, be adding them to the Knowledge Vault as well. We go into agent tables, all kinds of stuff here that is really pretty decent documentation about these kind of programs and their existence in the past.
Yeah, there have been a lot of books in the past about some of the weaponized insects. There's plague and fleas, which Willy worked on, and yellow fever and mosquitoes. But the things that sort of the new territory that my book broke was, first of all, the person who was heralded as the Lyme disease discoverer, his involvement in all those insect-borne experiments that I mentioned, and that they actively weaponized ticks. So he would take ticks in the very beginning, and he would shove little glass pipettes down their mouths and put disease agents in them. He was doing sort of trial and error animals to try and match a disease with a given tick, and then the people at the bioweapons headquarters in Dietrich would see which combo of diseases and insects suited their military objectives, because sometimes they wanted a really deadly insect germ combo. Sometimes they'd want something that was just chronically incapacitating. It would be a multifaceted plan to disable the enemy, to destroy their economy.
Yeah.
Just like with Cuba, let's make the sugar cane workers sick, and it'll starve the people, and they'll revolt against Fidel Castro.
Yeah. Well, and because that was one of the many things that was done. It's kind of scary once we start talking about biological research, especially in the climate that we are in now, with the big C word roaming around out there. Vaccines, of course, that are coming across seem to be doing a decent job, but much like our guest John Hall and I have talked about, like, we can get ready to see numerous variants. We are already seeing that. Just about one per country it's landed in, there is a variant. So, like, it's pretty textbook, some of this, and even the scalability of things. Whenever you look and start reading the documents, like what I have up on screen, talking about, this document specifically entitled "An Evaluation of Ontological Warfare as a Potential Danger to the United States and European NATO Nations." So actively a study done to see what the viability of such things would be and what the spread numbers would be.
Yeah, one of those documents that I find particularly appalling is that they calculated the price per death of various strategies of bioweapons agents.
Yeah.
So one of the agents they used was tularemia, which can be tick-borne. And what they, beginning of the 60s, they said, we're not going to mess with live insects. We'll just take the germs we were putting in the insects and we'll brew them in large stainless steel vats like you would beer with yeast or whatever, and grow them in mass quantities and freeze dry them and aerosolize them, and then we can spray them with crop duster like things over battalion size areas or cities even.
This is incredibly affordable, even for 1974, folks, or 76. This is 76. Planning, $87.5, $8,750. Not horrible. Agent production, just over the cost of planning, actually, $10,000 just to produce the biological agent itself. Munitions acquisition would be $9,897. That would be delivery systems, that kind of stuff, and of course weapons employment, $5,700, for a total of $34,347, folks.
Or $1.33 per death by tularemia.
Yeah.
What a deal that they put a price on a human life for $1.33.
And looky there, we're talking about attack with yellow fever infected mosquitoes, and the viability of it. What size? Approximately 22,200 light. Wow, the numbers are staggering. It's crazy.
Yeah, and the danger of that is, that was against the Geneva Convention, which the U.S. didn't sign. But, nowadays we know you can't control nature like that. There's always blowback,
That's right.
So one of the things I was hoping the book would do would be to prompt the government to release a lot of the classified documents on what biological weapons they tested in what areas and what protective research they did for our own soldiers, because there was a long process to weaponize a germ like tularemia.
Sure.
You'd have someone like Willy do some experiments, try to mix and match it with insects, or figure out how to keep the bugs alive, and then you would have Dietrich do small pilot studies. You would do open-air tests in Dugway, Utah, of live agents, which is 50 miles as the crow flies from Salt Lake City, Utah. And then you might do a couple pilot studies in foreign countries like Cuba.
Yeah.
No. So there's in Cuba, that's 50 miles as the crow flies from Florida. And of course.
Yeah, that could have been dumped by Cessna.
Yeah.
Like, and even to know that of course, that our government explored programs like this, explores programs like this, And to know that we were looking at aerosolization of this kind of technology, that is pretty incredible.
I know. I can tell you, I think the experiment that was most jaw-dropping to me, because it really has impact on the Lyme disease outbreak that started to be noticed in the late 60s, and that is the radioactive tick experiments. So what happened there is a small, ambitious researcher at Old Dominion University in near Norfolk, Virginia. He got an Army and Atomic Energy Commission funding to take Lone Star ticks, make them radioactive, and then release them over months to years and see how far they would crawl in that time. And, the military objective of that, which is, of course, buried down low, is that if they drop poison ticks on the Soviet Union or in Vietnam, they want to know how far their weapon will spread over what time. So he did that, and he would take a pregnant tick full of eggs and inject it with radioactive fluid, and then the tick would have 2,000 to 3,000 little nymph ticks hatch, and they would remain radioactive for the rest of their life. Then he would put little canisters of 1,000 ticks in meter squares, like, a couple hectares of meter squares, and he would release 1,000 in each square, and then every month he'd come out and he'd collect the ticks in that square. He'd take them back to the lab. He'd use a Geiger counter to see how far the radioactive ticks had traveled. Then he would take all those ticks from that square and put them back in the original square. If he collected adult ticks, he would paint the backs of them with fluorescent paint. Then he would, wash, rinse, and repeat that for months to years. So the reason why that's so egregious is that, first of all, you don't know the lab ticks were completely clean. Willy said there's no such thing as a clean tick, in that even if you grow them in a lab, what do they get? And then what combos of disease do they get, when they're out in the wilds? And then the most outrageous thing is he released them on the Atlantic bird flyway. So they were picked up by birds, and the birds, the seabirds go from South America up through Canada, and the tick he was experimenting with was the Lone Star tick. And I call the Lone Star tick the Terminator of ticks. Oh my gosh, it's the only tick in North America that has eyes, so instead of just waiting on a blade of grass to bite you, it can stalk you and swarm.
Yeah.
And it also, the saliva of the ticks gives some people alpha-gal allergy. That's an allergic reaction to red meat.
Huh.
And then, to add insult to injury, that tick is the one that carries Rocky-Mounted spotted fever, which is the most deadly tick-borne disease, and it was on the bioweapons list for a while. And so, a year after these open-air tick experiments happened, all of a sudden, up the coast, Long Island, is when there was a huge outbreak of deadly Rocky-Mounted spotted fever. At the same time, Lyme showed up. At the same time that Babesia, this red blood cell infection, showed up. So, my hypothesis, and scientists need to prove this, but the timing is right, that this deadly outbreak of Rocky-Mounted spotted fever, which is spread by the Lone Stars, was it was ignited by this open-air experiment over these years.
Wow. And up on screen right now, I have more of this document showing Operation Big Itch, where they used fleas. Operation Big Buzz, where they were dropping. Oh God, I just lost it. Mosquitoes. Yeah.
That was an interesting story. That had been published in other books, but in Big Buzz, they dropped just thousands and thousands of mosquitoes in poor African American neighborhoods in Florida and Georgia. And then they had military people dressed up as public health workers and putting little mosquito traps in people's houses and stuff. And then they would go from house to house to see how many mosquitoes that they had released were there. They were not infected mosquitoes, but still, they were the mosquitoes that carry dengue and Zika. And, did they upset the natural order of mosquitoes,
Sure.
species?
Well, yeah, because you're going to have some loss within that migration. You're going to have some loss within that. You're, of course, going to have some that stick around. But that's really the only way for you to get a propagation number, like what was our effective propagation into the local population of mosquitoes,
Right. It's just a pilot study where we didn't know we were the guinea pigs.
Yeah. It's that's just it, to know that these things have happened for so long. And we talk with Dr. John Hall regularly about targeted individuals, targeting technology, things like that, where there is literally no law that prevents the federal government from experimenting on the populace or its contractors, mind you. So it's kind of frightening to know that. And it's kind of frightening to know that, they have come into our backyards. They have released these things on purpose to test their effectiveness, so to speak.
Yeah, and the bioweapons program was officially ended in '72 with Nixon. But there are lasting impacts on the environment from those experiments.
Sure.
And even when they were releasing simulant bacterium that they thought were harmless, in some cases they weren't harmless. For example, there was a Navy ship that sprayed a simulant in the 50s off San Francisco. Just a boat sprayed this Serratia bacteria up and down the bay, and then they measured it and said, yes, it spread across the whole Bay Area. They thought it was harmless, but all of a sudden, intravenous drug users were starting to get these red bacterium in their in cultures, and actually one guy who had a compromised immune system died at Stanford Hospital. And then they did that in the New York City subway system. At that time, the biological weapons program was competing for dollars with the nuclear program, and they wanted to prove that, we're at risk, so we need to do all this defensive research. So one of the CIA guys working at DTRIC, that's the biological weapons headquarters, he filled a light bulb with live simulant bacteria. And he went to New York City and he had a team of about 20 military or CIA military people to help him with this. And as the subway rumbled under the sidewalk, he smashed the light bulb in the grate in the sidewalk.
Oh, God.
And then he had all these people stationed all over the New York City subway. One of them had a camera case that was actually a sniffer. There was a woman with a purse. The guy who was in charge of it had, a camera that was a sniffer disguise. And then they determined, well, if this was anthrax, we would have, made a significant percentage of New York City sick. So give us money so we can figure out how to protect the country from something like this.
Wow. And when you start looking especially at many of the terrorist attacks that have happened over the last many years, the gas attacks that happened in France, all that kind of stuff, like that is the kind of stuff that is targeted. Even with the spread of corona, if you notice, the cities that were hit hardest first were the cities not only with large populations, but they were cities with large populations with standard mass transit systems, subways, train lines, things like that, where you had 100 people crammed into a car at a time in a tunnel and everybody else waiting in a tunnel. Things like that. Those were the cities that were hit first. So to know that, they were out testing the efficacy of this and the spread and use of it in in subway tunnels in New York is not a surprising fact at all.
Yeah, and why it's important that we learn about this really dark Cold War history, and we declassify those documents, is so we can learn from history.
That's right.
So we can think about, we're going to genetically modify mosquitoes to protect us from Zika, but let's not just do a really large open-air trial, which they did. Let's be careful about it. And then the other thing is, we released all these things, and obviously we released hundreds of thousands of ticks that were non-native, and they're sort of taking over the native tick populations, and they sprayed things in pilot studies. So can the military please declassify that so we know what to test people for? Don't just say, these all just three freaky new tick-borne diseases all of a sudden showed up in the late 60s around Long Island. And then it also started in Wisconsin. Let's hear from the military what they released where, so we know what to test people for now, because obviously when they spread them, they're breathed in by bunny rabbits and mice and birds and spread to the ticks and mosquitoes. So, we need to understand what happened.
Well, precisely. Not only that, but we need to understand their process for what was the plan of action for, like, unmixing the Rubik's Cube after you solved it, Jack. Like, after you figured this out, do we have a current course of action to undo any damage that might be done? Did you even consider coming up with a course of action? Were these programs where it was like, we're just going to do damage and it doesn't matter if we have to do cleanup, we'll have the known loss numbers and we can send our guys in after, and we'll just lose a percentage of them, and even that thought, to know that, I mean, there's always, of course, a casualty number whenever you're talking about war or any kind of operations. But to know that there is an allowable, just like, we know that this number is going to die. This isn't even a possible given. If you walk into this infected area, this is going to happen.
Yeah. And, anybody who's had Lyme disease knows that the disease tracking system is broken. And when coronavirus hit, it really broke in a very visible way because there were body bags. I mean, the casualty rate was huge.
Yeah.
The parallels I see between the Lyme epidemic and the COVID epidemic it was the failures of the CDC. They had, in the beginning, they've had bad testing. With Lyme disease, we still have bad testing.
Yeah.
No test really works reliably in the first month. We have fragmented disease tracking. We're just getting our contact tracing together with COVID. And with Lyme, we still don't have it together. And then the CDC hasn't been keeping up with sort of the evolving symptom set of tick-borne diseases, because it's not just one tick-borne disease. It's not like one person and one disease. You can get 1 to 4. I've heard of people getting 5 diseases from one tick bite or multiple tick bites at the same time.
Oh, sure. That's what they do.
That's a heck of messy symptom set that isn't in the textbooks. That's why you need an experienced clinician to be your guide through that nightmare.
Yeah, and unfortunately, unlike people that you meet on some strange dating app, it's not the fact that you can ask a tick where they've been.
I know.
There's not that uncomfortable conversation, you're safe too, right? Like, you practice safe things. Like, no. They are pretty indiscriminate. They do not care what they bite as long as it has warm blood.
Well, I think the most fun chapter I wrote was the first chapter, which I had a writing instructor, and he said, why don't you write this first chapter like Jaws? So if you go back to Peter Benchley's Jaws, the first chapter is from the point of view of the shark.
Yep.
And the cold precision, the magnificent Darwinian evolution that has brought this perfect killing machine, in contact with humans. And so that's what I did. I just did, the first chapter was written by a tick, basically. It's the point of view of the tick. And it's terrifying. And as I researched it, it just made me want to throw up, because, oh my gosh, ticks are so clever. I mean, the way they can crawl, they have no eyes, but they can sense the CO2 that your body emits. And they have little, like, velociraptor grappling hooks on their front legs.
Yeah.
And you just brush by them and they hook on. And then they can creep up, and then they'll find a place to hide your belly button, your armpit, your private parts. In my case, it was below my hairline or above my hairline. And then they just have these, like, I don't know, it's like these little shovels that quietly dig a little hole, and their saliva makes the skin numb so you don't feel it. And then they release from their saliva an anticoagulant so you just don't scab over.
Yep.
And then their bellies start, like, contracting like a bellows, and they lap up the blood. And then the worst thing is they release a chemical in your bloodstream that suppresses your immune system about a week. So whatever germs are in their bellies are going to be in you.
Yeah.
It gets a head start.
Wow. And like you said, through the research done, really finding that not just the perfect host, but the perfect species amongst the perfect host that would carry it properly and carry it effectively.
Yeah.
And now, I know that we are coming up on an hour. That is normally as long as we keep first-time guests. If you would like to keep talking, we'll gladly keep talking. But I also understand that people have lives. So, here in the last couple of minutes, I would like to kind of wrap up. Number one, as a reporter, as someone with a history of that, do you find a lot of this stuff being covered in the news, period? And I guess also are these programs still active?
No. I mean, since 1972, U.S. officially hasn't been doing biological weapons. And, we have a defensive program.
Yes.
And if you have enough agent to create a defense against some of these germs, then if you wanted to turn it to an offensive program, it would be fairly easy. That's called, in the jargon, the dual-use program. But we have better ways of killing people these days than live organisms. So I think they're probably working on other weapons, but that's also secret. I can't even get, 50-year-old documents from the government, so there's no way I know what's going on now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And even just to know that with everything going on with coronavirus, things like that, we even outsourced our gain of function research here in the United States. We, of course, said that, we weren't doing gain of function. Well, no, we weren't technically, but we were definitely funding it. So, and it's just strange that, we outsource bat virus research to Wuhan, China. Strange things like that, where, we don't have active weaponry programs anymore. But like you're saying, the technology to weaponize it is pretty readily at hand.
Yeah, and we just need a better way to track these new diseases. Yeah. I mean, we obviously botched the COVID outbreak.
A little bit. Well,
we're trying to recover now.
You got to admit that it exists first. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Even foreign nations and national bodies outside of our country, international bodies have to admit it's existing first. You know, that's a big issue. You can't obfuscate that.
Exactly.
So, with a couple minutes left, of course, one question that begs to ask is, how are you? How is your family? Are y'all well now? Everybody okay? Are there regular lingering effects from the Lyme disease that you suffered?
I've been really healthy since 2010. My husband has had a couple relapses, which is frustrating. And then around Halloween this year, he got COVID, and he was he's fine, but I would call him a long hauler now because he doesn't have his taste or smell back. Which is he's a guy who enjoyed a good glass of wine, so that's very frustrating for him.
Yeah. Absolutely. And must be heart-wrenching for your family to still be going through the issues of one and have the other come up.
Yeah, especially since my husband, I mean, a lot of men are like this. They're tough guys. They don't want to see the doctor. Plus, when you've been sick this long, you get PTSD. It's like, oh, no,
you just
please
don't
send me to another doctor.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
Exactly.
But, I would say if people think they have Lyme disease, a really good website is lymedisease.org. It's very patient-focused. There's a symptom checklist, where to find an expert in your neighborhood. And then if you pull an engorged tick out of you, save it. Don't flush it.
Yes.
Like, put it in a little plastic baggie with a very damp little piece of paper towel, and Google where you can send in your tick and get it tested. And the great thing about that is there are some really good labs that will sequence the DNA of everything inside that tick. And then you'll have a head start on what's in it. And you can take that to your doctor and say, if you're not sick, ignore it. But if you start getting symptoms, and take it to your doctor and said, hey, I had spotted fever and Lyme disease in this tick, will you test me for it? Because the Lyme disease test does not work reliably in the first 2 to 3 weeks. It's an antibody test. It's indirect.
Wow, that is, and that's frightening, to know that that's just it, to know that we have known about Lyme disease as long as we have known about it. Is even though rare, even though the doctors are like, you don't have Lyme disease, it's so rare, like you'd be struck by lightning twice before you had Lyme disease. Things like that. There's still nothing really there that is dependable, and that's what's kind of frightening.
Yeah, and if you compare it to AIDS, which was that
same window,
hit the public the same year.
Yeah.
We have now for HIV/AIDS, we have you can go and get an over-the-counter saliva test, and it's fairly reliable, like 92%. You can know if you have it at home instantly. But with Lyme disease, you have to make a doctor's appointment. You'll get abused for saying it's a rare disease, even though it's in 50 states. Then you have to take 2 tests. You probably have to go to the doctors twice, and it takes weeks. And by then, you might have a really entrenched neurological infection. Yeah. So we can do better. I know we can do better. Exactly.
And I want to thank you so much for coming on this show. You are more than welcome to come back on anytime. I would love to have you back on to talk more about your research into the world of biological weapons programs, things like that, because so many of these scientists tend to work in similar areas. They tend to work in similar projects. They run in the same circles, so these programs cross paths, let's just say. And once again, I would love to have you back on.
Thanks. I would love to come back on.
Let everybody know, of course, other than dudesandbeer.com/store, where they can go to get your book, Bitten, The Secret History of Lyme Disease and Biological Weapons. Kris, it is time for shameless self-promotion.
Okay. Well, any place you get books, you can get Bitten, Amazon, or Barnes & Noble, or your indie bookstore. It's in stock mostly. And there's Kindle and audio for people who want to listen on their drives. There, I would recommend, if you think you have Lyme disease, to watch my documentary. It's called Under Our Skin, and if you have an Amazon Prime subscription, you can watch it for free.
Oh, wow, fantastic.
Yeah, and it really shows the patient experience, and it helps you to see if you have symptoms similar to those people, and it helps explain to relatives what you're going through, because it's not just you. It makes you feel less alone, I would say. And then I would, if you want to see some of the creepy Cold War pictures of the biological weapons program, I would recommend you go to my personal website, krisnewby.com, under the images. And all along I collected the images. They're just very Dr. No, Cold War, very interesting.
Yeah, it is very, very much that Dr. Strangelove feel once you start, like, seeing and I'm popping some up on screen right now, once you start seeing things like the rats ready for biopsy, and the large chambers and things like that with the measuring devices attached to them, like it's not gonna lie, kind of jealous. That's the kind of facility I want, just not for those horrible things.
Well, and I would say the story is not dry history. I tried to make it like The Hot Zone. It's a narrative nonfiction. Yeah. I tried to bring Willy alive and really have you understand what it's like to go to work and put plague and fleas and then come home to your new babies and think, wow, this is weird. How he got sucked up into it and how he redeemed himself in the end by letting out some of the truth anyways.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time tonight. Please do hold the line while we close things out.
Okay.
While you're online checking out KrisNewby.com, make sure to stop on by dudesandbeer.com. That is, of course, where you can get all the episodes. That is where you can get the app to listen to episodes live, post-play, whatever. Make sure to stop on by the HC Universal Network. That is our home network. Great shows like Yes But Why Podcast, Talking Sound Podcast, Richard Spazov Show, Scary Dad, Kicking or Sticking Fantasy Football. Great wrap-up to the Super Bowl, guys, by the way. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, if you can't be good at it. We will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Dudes and Beer Podcast. To listen to our audio streams or chat with us live, download the official Dudes and Beer app for Android and iDevices, available on Google Play and iTunes markets. For more episodes, content, and information, visit us online at dudesandbeer.com. You can also find our episodes on Breach.tv, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast service. Dudes and Beer is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. For more about our sponsors and other podcasts on this network, visit hcuniversalnetwork.com. Thanks for listening, everybody, and until next time, drink responsibly.